Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Podcana episode 52. 52 weeks. That's pretty crazy. That's 1 year, which is a funny story. We'll get into that. But for episode 52, we are joined by Alphos NZ, who is not actually living in NZ. I figured that one out after thinking he was traveling across the world for all these events. Turns out he lives a little bit closer. But Alphos, welcome to the pod. I know you've been streaming a lot, been doing some deck techs and deck guides over on your channel. It's great to finally have you on.
Yeah, I mean, I've been listening to you guys most weeks. It's you're my favorite podcast to listen to while I'm editing myself, or I'm just doing some silent deck testing. So really enjoy that, and I especially like the special treatment I get if I leave a comment. I can almost guarantee to show up in the listeners' questions the week after. But yeah, no, I wish I had the money to spend $2,000 every 3 months to go to like a 3K tournament. That would be insane. That'd be some true nepotism.
Yeah, that's honestly what I thought was happening. But yeah, so it's a funny story because Podcana hits 1 year on this episode, but the Podcana is the first podcast that I've been a part of that has had kind of host changes and like this whole panel change. So Moyen and Kawa haven't been on for a year, but technically the podcast is a year old. It's we actually started it far before a year ago as well because it went on a little bit of a hiatus. Anyway, I'm happy where we ended up. Congrats everyone on a year. And yeah, we'll see if we can make it to 2 years. Just want to hit a few headlines before we get into this building section. And then ultimately for the main topic we're going to be talking about, I mean, what else could we talk about except the new decks, some of the best decks in the metagame, new impactful cards, all that good stuff. But for headlines, the Podcana T-shirt is up for sale right now. If you're listening to this on Friday, that is the last day to buy it. It will be gone forever after today, when this is releasing. So pick that up if you're interested in supporting the pod. Also, we are going to hold a contest for someone who submits a review for us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Mostly Apple Podcasts, though, because trust me, that's like the most, I don't know, it's the easiest one to pull reviews from, at least. So a new review for Podcana on Apple Podcasts. We'll do a 7-day little challenge there. We'll pick a winner, and one of those people will get a free shirt. Funnier the better, but make it tame. Anyway, on to the spilled ink section. So our listener question section, Alphos, like you said, you speaking of nepotism, you do get a bit of nepotism every time you comment, so you do make it in. We've got some other people in here as well. So I'm going to pass over to Kawa. We'll head into the spilled ink for these listener questions.
All right, so the first one's from Ludini. I love this podcast and all your content, guys. Keep it up. Question: how does discarding a card at random work at an in-person event? Talking about playing We Don't Talk About Bruno. Would you like roll a dice or something? I could see an opponent being really cagey about it. So there's multiple different ways you could go about this, and even the designers of the game spoke about this as well. I think there'll be two most common ways that will happen. The first one is like you mentioned, you'll roll a dice, and you can kind of do that. Or secondly, you just get your hand, you shuffle them, you put them out in front of your opponent picks a card. That will be that. I actually think that will be the most common way that will be done. Brendan, have you seen any other ways for this to be done in other card games for discard stuff?
I think the short answer is like 90% of the time, your opponent will just hold out their cards and you'll pick one. At like a professional level event, believe it or not, that still happens. But to truly randomize it, people will just they'll put the cards down. They'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's say there's 3 cards. Then they roll a dice and they randomly pick one from there. Yeah, I mean, sometimes like that whole process is just so cumbersome and time consuming that I'm just like, let's pick a card. Like I'll just pick one. But ultimately, yeah, like the super high level events, you do want to kind of randomize it, and it is usually done via a dice, and you just kind of assign numbers on that dice to cards in your hand. So if you had 5 cards, for instance, you would just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 would just be like a reroll.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Next comment from RJ. Near the end, I realized not all cards were released when you guys made the video, or you guys would have mentioned the steel popsicle. Sapphire Steel is back on the menu, baby. When I saw that card, I was like, wow, this looks pretty good. Like I think we say this every set. We're like, Steel has such amazing cards, and it just keeps getting better cards. But yeah, I never really thought of the implications of now in Sapphire Steel, you can literally run 8 popsicles in your deck, which is kind of wild. Have any of you guys experimented with this new card yet, or even your thoughts on the card?
Alphos, have you tested it out at all? I mean, this is one that we actually missed. I don't mean missed as in like I read it and then
it wasn't out when we recorded.
Yeah, it wasn't like I read it and was like, oh, it's not that powerful. It's like I literally didn't see it. I mean, this card is insane.
I mean, I think it's a great card. I haven't really tested Sapphire or the item based builds yet. I'm going to be doing that soon. But some really weird discourse I found online was people saying, is this better or worse than Popsicle? Like, would I rather the bodyguard effect? Would I rather the heal? It's just like, just run both. You're running it for the draw. You're really comparing the wrong aspects here. Yeah, I mean, it's a solid card. It gives more consistency, and it gives the Haram draw engine. Just, you can invest further into it by going with the Judy Hops and the Tamatoas and just really go all in on that strategy, especially with the new aerial. So having more items on the board is more significant than it was before.
Yeah, for sure.
I think
next
now
one,
you can just build it where you win the game extremely quickly of getting like 7+ lore of a dime sometimes.
Yeah.
When you just stack up all the one cost cantrips.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy actually, because the amount, like, I get so frustrated if my opponent even just like rips a popsicle off the top and then they start doing the Hiram thing. And now the amount of times that's going to happen is pretty much going to be double if it's Sapphire Steel. In Sapphire Ruby, it's still just the 4 popsicles, but yeah, it's frustrating because you're pretty much just like, please don't have that engine, please don't have the engine. And now the engine's going to be doubled, which is so powerful. So
imagine if Ruby had another popsicle.
That would be insane. That
would be even more.
It would be absolutely Joker, because I think Blue-Red is still a really good deck. That's the deck that I've been playing around with the most. It's probably the only thing that's going to keep that. I don't know what the blue steel deck could be weak to as well in the metagame, because I saw some people saying, like, I mean, particularly Savjz was saying, like, oh, it's not that powerful, it's kind of cute. I'm like, I mean, it just seems super powerful. I'd love to play blue steel with like 8 cantripping items that cost 1, but I think that Blue-Red is still like a monster of a deck, and I think it got some really good upgrades, and it's a deck that I'm the most excited for. Actually, my biggest question is going to be around Ruby Amethyst. Like, does Ruby Amethyst finally get power crept out of the metagame? I think it's super possible. We talked a lot about the gameplay of Lorcana, just like our enjoyment of the gameplay of Lorcana increasing set by set, because we're really flushing out the archetypes more. Like, I was experimenting with the Blue-Red deck, and I was like, wow, this feels so much more like a control deck now than it did in the previous set. Because we've had these like variations of aggro, mid-range, and control, but like all of them have had mid-rangey elements, I would say, because we just don't have like the hyper control, the power, like the powerful enough cards that could fit that kind of archetype. It's like, it still felt very mid-range. I think as we move set to set to set, the archetypes become more defined. And that's very much shown in the blue steel deck. Like, that is very much a hardcore item control deck. You're putting out tons of items. Sometimes you're tapping Lucky Dime for like 12. Like, it's really, really cool in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
I think the big difference, well, if I could touch on the blue steel argument, I think the big difference between it is that while they both did get new tools, Blue-Red got tools that shored up some of its weaknesses, whereas Blue Steel didn't really get anything that shored its weaknesses. It just made its already strong parts more powerful, but it still is going to struggle a bit into early game, and especially against decks that can discard, the quills and the grab your swords whole new world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. That's what's really interesting at the Blue-Red package is, like you said, it did get some cards that'll deal with that early game. Some of them are not super efficient, like in the form of Brawl. Like, it's not the most efficient removal, but the Sisu package is pretty legit, to be honest. Like that small uninkable Sisu, the 3 cost, but then ultimately shifting into what is a board wipe when is a one-sided be prepared against some of your opponents is just crazy.
Yeah, I'm excited to test out the deck myself for sure. Next comes from Kyle. The 2 rules you need to look at for the question about Diablo are below. So last podcast, we talked about the whole interaction between Diablo and if your opponent plays Let the Storm Rage On. So it says, when you play an action, you resolve it completely before anything else happens. Once it's fully resolved, game state checks characters' damage and health. You then resolve the bag however you would normally. In this instance, you resolve Let the Storm Rage On, dealing 2 damage and drawing a card. When you draw the card, Diablo will put a trigger in the bag. Action is now resolved, and game state sees Diablo having 2 damage on him, and he is banished. You now resolve the Diablo trigger. So, from my understanding, this is so you draw the card, right?
Really interesting, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think actually the first explanation of the bag system, but has helped me actually get the bag system. Everyone's like in-person explanations. It didn't make sense to me before this.
Yeah,
so the idea of the bag system is the trigger is in the bag. That's weird. I mean, it makes sense in the concept of a stack. Like the Diablo trigger is on the stack, and it ultimately resolves regardless of the condition of said Diablo. But Interesting. What? Can you explain the bag to me? Like, it's my first time hearing it, actually.
I think it's very similar to the stack, basically,
Okay.
is what you're saying.
Flesh and
It's
Blood
just-
tried to do that, by the way. They tried to make their own name for it. They called it the Chain Link, and it was so fucking confusing. And then 2 years in, they just renamed it the Stack because everybody just
Okay.
called it the Stack. It might be different in Lorcana, but yeah.
Isn't the difference that you can change the ordering like after resolving a trigger, whereas in like a chain link or a stack or whatever, the ordering is somewhat predetermined and then gets added onto to like the end of it. So it's more like, first come, first serve, like with programming, rather than just choosing what you want out of a bag whenever you want it, which is, I think, why they use that analogy.
Yeah, so is the bag, the active player gets to choose the order in which things
I'm
resolve
pretty
in the
sure it
bag?
is, yeah. I'm pretty sure it's the active player, yeah.
Makes sense. Cool.
Next one's from Samwise. Great podcast as always. What are your thoughts on the new 3 and 8 cost rupee Sisu for Red Blue? I mean, Brendan just touched upon it there. I think it's really good. I'm particularly a fan of the small Sisu. I think it's going to be really impactful. Great way to get rid of Hiram, especially in the mirror match. I think that's going to be like a super, super important card. Nice way to shut down the engine. Besides Hiram, I don't think it hits like too many great targets. I mean, you've got like Rapunzel and stuff. Maybe we see some cards that come into the meta. Like, I'm not gonna. This is a very bad example, but let's even just say like Kita and Sisu, right? Like a card that reduces the attack of an opponent's card and then use Sisu. But I think that's like
Merfolk as well, which I think is relevant.
oh yeah,
a little bit late.
It's
On
Diablo as well, no?
Yeah.
Diablo's
it's a 2/2, but
right?
I think it hits the other.
Oh yeah, sorry,
Diablo's a
one
shift,
attack.
right? Yeah, the other Diablo, like the
it
1/2
hits the small
is.
one.
Yeah.
Okay. So personally, I'm not that impressed by the 3-cost Sisu because I don't know if it's good enough for being an uninkable in a deck that plays like a million broken uninkables.
Yeah.
Plus it kind of it's in a weird spot on 3 ink as it's not great post 1 jump ahead, and it's also competing with a Quill if in the games where maybe you don't hit 1 jump ahead. And it's not super flexible. Have you
seen Icebox though? That's like the new one. Yeah. Okay, yeah. How do you feel about it in that context?
I think it needs that context for me to really see the potential in the card. I think without that context, I'm not really sure I see how it improves Ruby Sapphire. But together with if you do play Icebox in your deck, and then for the Medusa, for the maybe Brawls, maybe the 8-cost Sisu, and then maybe the 3-cost Sisu can make sense as well.
Yeah, that Icebox is really facilitating the essence of a control deck that I was talking about when I was playing this deck, because I agree, like Sisu and Brawl in particular, they're not super flexible cards. And you could even make the argument against Madame Medusa, but meta context being relevant, Madame Medusa was hitting almost everything in the previous meta. Now with Icebox, it's like, oh, my fucking Brawl is like trading up. I can banish it with Hiram, of course, but I can grab it back with Tamatoa to event. Like, let's say I have a bunch of ink. I've ramped, right? We're in the late game. My opponent is like flooding the board a little bit. Obviously, you could be prep with this usually, but now your Tamatoa is like fetching back some Icebox. You may have banished for Draw Engine early in the game, and then you're playing those Iceboxes, and then you're dropping your 8-cost Sisu and having this like one-sided B prep. Like, there's a list that we'll talk about for Blue Red that I really enjoyed and I really liked, and it had some of those gameplay elements that I just mentioned, and it felt really good, to be honest, because those cards are narrow. Like, anybody who says they're not is, that's just ridiculous. But in the context of a new 1-cost item, they seem pretty good.
I absolutely love Iceblock and the gameplay it promotes, but I never thought I would say that, because in Hearthstone, it was just a secret that made you immune when you take fatal damage for an entire turn. So it was like not the most interactive card in Hearthstone.
Oh yeah, Iceblock, the mage secret. Yeah. I played.
I was just thinking.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I think Icebox also necessitates almost in Ruby and Steel the use of Lumiere and the Steel equivalent to bring the attack back up to stay out of. So because you're already running it to stay out of the Medusa threshold, and even then to just stay at it. Like, if you're not running it and Icebox is being run, then you're going to be able to hit a higher threshold at 4 attack for Medusa, 3 attack for Brawl, 2 attack for Sisu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's super interesting how we're like that. The manipulation of the attack on both sides of the board is becoming more relevant, with like the opponent increasing theirs and then you also decreasing the attack.
Because I think in set especially in set 2, we talked a lot on the pod about how much more important willpower is than strength.
Yeah.
And like as a gameplay fundamental. And now there's so much removal that cares about strength that suddenly we don't necessarily want the strength to banish stuff. We just want the strength to not be banished by Medusa and friends.
Yeah, because you're getting these like crazy 2-for-1 values in some of those. Like Sisu is an absolutely insane card if you have developed like multiple ice boxes. I mean, in terms of a value exchange, considering the ice box is like a multi-utility card, can be banished for Flavershem, also is relevant with Big Sisu. But the fact that like your 3-cost Uninkable can trade up on a 2-for-1 is just crazy. I like the gameplay. I just love the fucking gameplay loop of Red Blue now. Like at least that version, it might get phased out by power, but it's super fun.
Yeah, that makes sense. Next comments from Conman. Hey guys, long-time listener / watcher. First time asking a question. With this new set releasing, how do you guys go about brewing new decks for competitive play? What are your first steps? Do you pick new cards you are fascinated in strategy-wise and build around, or focus more on certain win conditions? I guess I'll pass this question around to everyone because it is actually really interesting. I'll start with you, Alphos.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my priorities are different. I kind of want to get a viable deck out that has a card or combo that's really interesting that I can sort of like market my video around and say, hey, look how cool this deck is, right? But I think if you're going more for a competitive angle, a really good place to start is take a deck you're already really comfortable on and you know the reasons why it's good, why it's bad, and then see how new cards can fit into shoring up weaknesses or strengthening areas where it's already strong. And if you want to just brew a deck from scratch, like what I do with these new ideas is you literally start with the cards you're really interested in building around, add every single card that you think could be good in that deck, and then just start cutting. Because as you're cutting, you're forced to compare one card to another card and see if it better suits that scenario or not.
Yes, and that's really important. Do cut cards, please. We talked about this last week. We're like, I love all these cards. I'm going to run a 70-card deck.
What's your opinion on fucking how many cards to play in Lorcana?
Well, I think it's always wrong if you're not playing a mill deck to not play 60, but I also think you're unlikely to see the effects of it in one sample of a tournament. So I can understand why people's brain are going, well, it worked for me, or it worked for Decandio, they made top cut. But that's more of just like a skill diff outpacing the minus like 3% they lost.
Yeah, imagine taking a
number than that.
I'm just taking a minus X% for actually zero reason. Like that's the crazy part of it. Is like there's actually no upside almost ever. 60.
Yeah, that's the thing. You will, when playing with 61 cards, it's not like the gameplay will feel different or you'll realize it's just, but you still know it's worse.
Yeah, that's where math comes in. Like it is just the truths of the universe tell us that is a very bad thing to do.
Yeah, you'll never feel it, but you, like you said, Moin, you'll know that it is bad. Yeah.
Also, you will lose my respect if I see you on 61 cards.
But I don't know. Maybe everything's deterministic, and Decandio is just destined to win every event, so it doesn't matter what they put in their deck.
In touch,
just bring a starter deck.
Yeah.
I think the other way to build decks is also, it's coming back to the question that if you build around something that you think is like very powerful, and then you put cards in that are powerful and work with that strategy, and then you realize like maybe let's say you had like 40 cards and you're running out of cards that you actually feel good about putting into your deck. Maybe there's an issue there, but coming up with an entire new archetype where it's not just building upon something you already know takes lots of experience and lots of time. And there's also the risk of you just being wrong and baiting yourself into playing something that's not actually good. Because when is the time where you actually need to test with new cards to find a new hyper competitive deck? It's like when there's a tournament on a new set, like quickly after new set release. Because if it's not exactly for that, then that means that probably there's no rush in doing so, and you can, like, the meta is going to develop in a little bit of time anyways, and you have more data to base your deck building off. But if that's not the case, it's often very risky, and you need to be very sure about doing something completely new.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite example of that is I spent 12 hours on a day in set 2 trying to brew Ruby Steel because I just wanted to get one last deck out of a set. 12 hours later, I was like, oh, deck's just so bad. I can't do anything to make it good. And I gave up, and it's just the whole day was gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm pretty contrary to, I think, a lot of people in these panels, which might be a surprise or not be a surprise to people, but I actually mostly just net deck people off the rip, and then I just make the deck better. Like that's just like, I feel like that's my strength, and I do think that like there's this idea of like deck builders and tweakers. I think if you consider yourself a deck tweaker, it's kind of just copium. You're probably just a bad deck builder. Nevertheless, I do consider myself a deck tweaker. Yeah, so like I just like to get a nice, like, consistent base and shell, like a foundation, and then I find that I like to improve it from there. And I do think that I have been successful with that, like across multiple games, and even in Lorcana recently. Like I just have I don't usually have like a 60 card wacky idea. I have like a 4 card wacky idea, whether it's like evasives and RA, it was adding bells back into blue red. Like that's kind of like just how my brain works. It's not like, oh, let me go pull in all of these new cards that I have very little experience with. It's like, let's take the foundation. It's like, okay, how do we break this? And that's just how I like to work, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I do think they're two entirely different skill sets, and you never need to touch the deck building skill set to be good at card games. Like the from the ground up skill set just requires you to know more about card game design than it is actually why cards work well in a competitive environment. Because at some point, once you're done deck building, you have to become an optimizer anyway if you want to make it competitive. So you can ignore that first step entirely. And this is probably best if you want to win tournaments and just focus on optimizing. Because why do like the first 80% if it's only the last 20% that actually matters to your result in the win?
I mean, the biggest edge you gain from doing the 80% work is if you never share it with the public, like we would do if we find something.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, especially on tournaments on fresh sets, like that's where the deck building skill really pays off in terms of gaining an edge for that tournament.
Yeah. That's why you surround yourself with deck builders if you're like me. You just surround yourself with good ones.
All right, next comment is from Mr. That. Amazing video again, boys. I've been really enjoying Moyen's streams. I'm having a hard time on ladder. I keep getting stuck at 1400. Any tips on how you got through this part of the ladder? Thank you so much for the content. I really appreciate it. Moyen, what have you done when you've had a tough time on ladder? Have you kept playing? Have you quit? Have you taken a break? Like, what's your best advice?
I don't have tough times. I just win.
You just
No.
yeah, okay. I'm gonna flash. I'm too lazy to edit in, but I should flash the screenshot of Moyen in the group chat saying every deck sucks.
Every deck sucks. I can't win with anything.
Sucks.
No, okay. So to be honest, I mean, you don't have to, but I just keep going. I'm like losing, even big losing streaks are completely part of variance and don't necessarily mean that you've lost the plot and that you're playing a bad deck and playing it badly. That's not always the case. It's just, I don't know, no matter how much you win or lose on like any day specifically, I don't think the tips change at all. It's always keep trying to improve at every step you can, and then you'll get, because like it's not like I play differently when I'm at 1,400 and then 1,450. It's like you always just try your best to win and try your best to improve.
Yeah.
I also think there's a lot of value in playing and continuing to play when you're tilting if you're trying to improve, because when you actually learn how to manage with that, sense of defeat and loss and maybe annoyance at RNG, because if you don't know how to manage that variance mentally, you're not going to be able to manage it in a tournament. You can't just like, hey, let me take a break for a few hours, cool down, I'll come back, pause round 6 for a bit. You can't do that. So you got to learn how to deal with those emotions if you want to top cut these events.
Mm-hmm. Next one's from Macho. Big fan here. Great work, guys. Keep it up. Question: why does Brendan hate Emerald so much? He's so clearly biased against it.
Yeah,
I think Moyen
why does Brendan hate the turbo discard color? Yeah,
I know.
Concept.
I think Brandon loves drawing cards. Emerald doesn't draw that many cards.
Yeah, that's true.
And Brandon doesn't like getting his cards discarded because, again, he likes drawing cards, not discarding them.
That's
my guess.
Yeah, Emerald is currently the limiter of decision trees, both as the pilot and as the opposing player to the Emerald deck, which is just ultimately it's just not what I like in card games, which is fine. I don't have an actual bias against the color. It's just one color's got to be your least favorite. Emerald's just mine. I think Emerald is Podcana's
my
least
decision
favorite
trees
color.
feel pretty great.
No, bro, there are no. Yeah, do I sing this? Do I make them discard a card and draw a card, or do I do some other play? It's infinitely worse. It's just
yeah. But you get to draw cards.
Yeah, true. It's
sometimes you get to draw cards. Yeah. The last comment is from O. Y'all pretty much said that all these cards are bad, and then said the set looks good. Guess you want to stay in good graces with Ravensburger.
Person has clearly never been here for a spoiler, by the way.
Yeah. It's quite funny because we've already talked about this, how we want to try and highlight the cards that we think are good. But we did a review of when we tried to go through an entire set, and we were just kind of we started talking about the card, trying to talk about why it's good, and they were like, no, this card's just bad. Why are we even trying? We're talking about this such niche scenario where maybe it's good, that we'd rather focus on just the cards that we actually think are good. And then it actually makes it good, because if we miss any cards that actually turn out to be good or people want us to talk about, then they can let us know, and then we can kind of return to it. So we've tried it already, trying to review everything and stuff, but maybe this person's more or less kind of talking about when I was I think, did I say last pod, I think the set's both, but in a good way.
Yeah, maybe. I just think this comment was just funny because you're definitely new to the podcast if you think that Podcana is trying to stay in good graces with Ravensburger, because we've definitely
Brandon is a PR nightmare.
Crossed some lines. Yeah, with our spoilers. But I mean,
what do you mean we've crossed lines?
That's all you, Brandon.
You're complicit. You're complicit.
No, it's for me. It's also basically. So I think a lot of good cards have been revealed after the podcast that I would have loved to talk about. But at the same time, even the cards that were already published when we released last week's pod, I don't. So basically, it wasn't like there was a lot of clearly broken cards, but that's not what I was looking for from the set. It was lots of cards that I thought were interesting enough, where they weren't super easy to evaluate, but also cards that I could see myself playing in very specific decks, maybe very specific metas, and lots of those are just a very fun toolbox to have when building decks. So I just still like the set, even if it wasn't the most broken set with the cards that we've seen at the time.
Yeah, I actually think the set looks pretty powerful. I have to experiment more with non-control decks, but there's a lot of new archetypical decks in different colors, a lot of the big song decks, and there's just, Bufasa is probably an actually competitive deck now. There's a lot going on, to be honest. The meta actually feels
always competitive.
That's not true.
Bufasa was trash always.
Sorry, that's just false. No, but there's so many things going on right now. I feel like this is set immediately has been more impactful than set 3. Set 3 was definitely overshadowed by Jafar when everybody was kind of complaining about that. But ultimately, I felt like we were kind of just expanding archetypes that already existed in set 3, like RA, Blue Steel, Amber Steel, and eventually Blue Red. Where here, I've seen a lot more color combinations kind of come to fruition. That could be just early brewing, but it does. For me, right now, this is going purely based on my feeling. It feels more impactful than potentially something like the previous set in terms of overall metagame shakeup. But who knows? Who knows? We'll see when Ladder comes out, because that's when people are going to start playing real decks. All right, that concludes our building section. If you want to get your question read out in next week's podcast, you shoot us a comment on YouTube. And then our main topic is the new set, new decks. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about Atlanta and Lille. And these events are super interesting, because I originally thought that I was oh wait, nobody can actually test for this, but Lab is getting moved. So Lab on Pixelborn is getting moved to set 3. I don't know if you knew this, Moyen. It's getting moved to set 3 on the 17th. So actually, when this podcast releases, Lab will actually be set 3 meta. But previous, I was like, wow, there's like not an efficient way for people to test for these events. And like the best way to test for it is definitely like an internal testing group. And 2,000 people are going to the event. There's no way that like the vast majority of those people have access to good and reliable resources to do that kind of internal testing. So I actually think that a lot of people are going to show up to Atlanta and Leo being a little bit rusty, to be honest. Like, I think that's going to be a real
totally
thing.
agree.
I think I'll show up a bit rusty, and I have great resources. It's just a fascinating turn. I've never played a tournament like this where a set is like fully out. I mean, they could have totally done this with set 4 cards, but card availability, whatever.
I think that's the biggest reason.
I think card
honestly,
availability is super
the,
important.
Yeah. Card availability has to be the reason why they've done it. I think, in my opinion, that people don't have access to all the cards, and I mean, also the fact with set 3 people. Yeah, it is interesting that you said. I feel like people should feel comfortable because they've been playing these for so long and they're playing like set championships and stuff like that. But then also, yeah, I will also feel rusty in a weird way, because if you're not mowing and you're not playing every single day and testing every single day, then it's gonna be hard enough. But that's the reason. That's the reason I think why it was card availability.
So the same thing is currently happening for me in One Piece, where I'm super rusty because it's at the end of the set and I have 2 tournaments coming up and I haven't played like since the last tournament, and the last tournament I got in was like a couple months ago. But I also wanted to say that this is, I'm so happy that there's a tournament for set 3, because set 3 was a great set that I enjoyed a lot, and I think it's a set that deserves to have a big tournament played with this set of cards. So I'm just very happy to also compete in this tournament.
Yeah, so am I. I think we mentioned that too in like a previous pod. It was just like set 3 has been my favorite Lorcana metagame so far. So yeah, I'm actually super happy. Also,
yeah,
we were pretty successful in set 3, so maybe there's like a little bit of rose tinted glasses. So it seems like it would be in our favorite ever tournament there. Anyway, let's talk about decks. Let's talk about new cards. I'm gonna start it off with a non-Alphos list, and then we're going to go into a bunch of Alphos lists. So first one is red blue. By the way, anything we talk about, link in the description. So if you want to look at the decks, link in the description. Definitely go there. That's how you follow along. This blue-red deck is my favorite deck. So far, I love this deck. Like, this is like a hyper control item based blue red deck. It uses Icebox with Madame Medusa, the new Sisus. It has Brawl as well. I don't know if the numbers are correct, but ultimately, like, it does feel like old red blue, just a lot more controlling. And I don't feel like I'm missing any of like some of the other elements like Shield of Virtue or Queen of Hearts. I mean, I didn't really like those cards anyway. Just like the Icebox feels like a good way to sort of, replace the Shield of Virtue, and it's super relevant in this deck. I've seen some other blue red lists that like cut things like one jump ahead, and they're adding a lot more new cards. Like, I just don't think I could never imagine cutting one jump ahead, to be honest. Like, I think ramping to that 4 slot is just crazy. And like Moin said, like the Sisu being a 3 cost, like 3 is a super awkward number in blue red because of one jump ahead, and it's just like you want to be doing that on 2 every single time. But still, due to the ice boxes, I really like it, and I love one-sided Be Prepared as well. Like, that is super fun. This deck also runs no Be Prepared, by the way. 0 Be Prepared. So it could get wrecked by Amber Steel or something like that, like some sort of wheel deck that's dumping everything on the board. I'm sure this might have a hard time dealing with. Is there any card in the game that like minus X attack to everything on board on the opposing side?
Kida.
Yeah, okay.
Right?
So, yeah.
4 ice blocks.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, 4 ice blocks. I mean, they are permanents. So, yeah, this is the deck that I'm on right now, and I really enjoy it. It does feel, a bit like the deck from the previous set, but that's like I mentioned, when I come into a new set, that's kind of what I do. I kind of just take what works and then I add a few new things in. Like, I don't go too crazy with it, which is, it's kind of boring, but this deck owns.
No, but it's still different enough. I think it's Scar's probably the obvious cut. I'm not sure it will end up playing 0 Be Prepared, but it might be the case if all of these removal tools are efficient enough and actually like are so much better at 2-for-1ing instead of just resetting the entire board. I can maybe see it.
Yeah. By the way, I net decked this from Siller, S4ILER, straight net deck. Yeah, Sailor. Yeah, 100% net deck.
Am I looking at the right one? Oh no, I was looking at Savjz's one. Okay,
Savjz's one has no one jump. That's yeah. Now this one's from Sailor. which I really
Yeah.
like. So we'll expand on that as the weeks come. But for me right now, blue red, this list is what I'm playing. Link in the description, find it. All right, on to Alphos decks. Starting off with lemon lime, but of a different flavor, not like the OG lemon lime set 1. Talk to me a little bit about this list, like what it does, core competency, why you like it, etc.
Yeah, so this is fresh in my mind because I just did a video on it today and I was playing it all on stream yesterday. So essentially, there are 2 modes to this deck, and the modes are preferably on the play, your discard mode, just classic green stuff, swarm the board, quest, and then you can use cards like Kida to protect your board and stop them from being traded into. But then the really fun mode is the new one where we're utilizing the Amber Songs package. So the bread and butter really is that obviously you're getting the Sudden Chill discards, maybe some draws from John, but what's really nice is Ariel has access to this new crazy spell, honestly really crazy song. We Don't Talk About Bruno, which once you've gotten your opponent to 0 cards, essentially acts as a singable Dragonfire that triggers a draw card for you. Like that's pretty nuts within the context of this deck. And even without that, it's still a singable Mother's Knows Best. Well, sorry, Mother's Knows Best is already inkable. Singable, but it is inkable. And then the God combo, the Nuts combo, which maybe might get cut from a deck later on, but for now I think it's impactful enough to keep, is you have a Kida on turn 1, then you play whatever 2-drop, you have an Ariel on free, and then maybe you grab the Under the Sea if you need it, or an extra Bruno for a follow-up later, and then you shift Kida on 4, sing the Under the Sea, and that asymmetrically board wipes your opponent's entire board. Especially if you're on the draw, that gets rid of their 4-drop 2, just everything is gone. And at that point, you can just start discarding cards and maintain your board position from there.
Mm-hmm. What do you find, what do you think about the matchup spread? I know it's a very early metagame. You're probably facing tons of different stuff, but what do you find that you're very strong against and what do you find that you're weak against? You can just use archetypical answers for traditionally something like this might be weak against steel. What do you find the strengths and weaknesses in terms of matchup and metagame?
Yeah, I do think going second into Flute Song specifically is the hardest matchup. And before I say the next bit, I'm going to clarify. I don't think I've been playing the best players in the world, right? It's not hardcore ladder. But I've been having a really easy time into red-blue, as you'd expect from a deck that's running Merfolk Flens. And I find even into the mirror of the similar, Amber Emerald decks with the discard, a lot of them focus more on the Muse and the small bounce to hand, which I don't think is the move. I think you end up not doing enough for how many resources you're investing into it and not pushing enough tempo. So I think this is, as it's a tempo deck, it does really well into other aggro decks, especially with the Under the Sea combo, and it does pretty well into mid-range decks. Yet to see how it does into Flute Song over a large gauntlet, but it's probably its worst matchup, and it just destroys any deck that's too greedy, because you're just going to be able to discard their entire hand and push a bunch of lore out onto the board.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
What comes to my mind is, have you put any thought into playing Tuck over Duck?
Tuck?
If you're, yeah.
Oh, Friar Tuck.
You're playing 4 Daisy Ducks, you will Tuck, so I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
So I've actually been testing it with the green Daisy Duck because the amber Daisy Duck hasn't been working in Pixelborn so far. I just think in theory the on-play discard is a nicer synergy with Friar John, because depending on if your opponent's going first or second, they're usually able to dump their hand by turn 4 after you've discarded once or twice. So I think the on-the-play discard is quite valuable. I think the Friar Tuck is probably never going to work with this deck because you tend to maintain more hand size than a traditional discard deck does. So I didn't envision a lot of situations where Friar Tuck would work. Unlike most Emerald decks, I try not to go into full top deck mode because this deck doesn't have amazing top decks.
Yeah, very interesting. Let's pop over to the Emerald Steel one you have here. What do you think? Emerald Steel is a very interesting pick of set 3, and I'm keen to see how it transitions into set 4 metagame. What have you cooked up here with this list? Your Hades Hero Control.
So this one's pure jank. I think it would take a lot of work to make it competitive. But I think there's some fun ideas to experiment with. I don't know if Hades is going to work in the long term, but the thing I'd really like to point out is the the most insane combo you can get in the game, if you can pull it off, is the total asymmetric board wipe. If you have a Hades on 4, or a Prince Philip on 4, either or, Hades on 5, and then you tink on 6, you can tap the Hades to banish the Philip, bring out the big Philip, and completely I think is it return? No, it's it's either bottom deck or banish the opponent's board, because they all have damage counters from Tinkerbell. So that obviously isn't happening often, but Hades on its own in this deck works fairly nicely because we have a lot of cards that share name tags, so you can get value out of trading with them, questing with them, and then banishing them and playing from your hand for free. So I did think about playing the 7-cost Simba along with the 1-cost Simbas, because that felt like pretty nuts value, and it's an enter the battlefield effect to deal 2 damage. Also, as Carl mentioned before the podcast, I think Chief Bogo would be a more consistent way to get value out of Prince Philip. The only problem is trying to find uninkable space in this deck, because even with the 2 hidden Inkcasters, which is an insane card for control deck building, especially in Steel, where you already want to run a lot of uninkables, I think it's quite hard to get a smooth curve out running Chief Bogo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's one deck here that I really, really want to talk about. Unfortunately, because we talked a lot of shit about this deck for, almost a year now. That's Boo Fossa, Red Fossa. This deck got a lot better. This deck is so much better. Got so many good cards. It's actually crazy. Like between the Julieta Madrigal, the Gaston, Mulan, like, I don't know. You also have Beast. Like, you're hitting those Rapunzel draws like so often now. I feel like the deck, what was just like a middling kind of mid-range deck, is now much more consistent, has a much better draw engine, and yeah, it just seems super powerful. I think this might be one of the better decks going into set 4.
Just looking at it, I think this deck's powerful. I'm surprised you say it got better, because I don't think it existed in the first 2 sets.
Oh my god! He's like, I say one thing, and he's like, no, let's double down. Not enough hate.
But I'd like to apologize to Humble, our resident Red Fossa player.
Yeah, I'm not apologizing. But this deck suddenly, if you draw Rapunzel, it's hitting, and you're flooding the board with very efficient cards. Gaston lets you turn 4. 2 for 1 with Medusa or Tremaine. But also, I don't think Mulan's very good in Ruby Sapphire necessarily, because it might be easier to play around where you just don't exert your shit into the key turns of Shift Mulan. But I don't think that's really an option when you're playing against this deck, because this deck's aggression, I think, will force you to leave up exerted characters where the Shift Mulan can really come in to punish.
Yeah. What's been your experience, Alphos? How have you felt about the power level of Red Fossa in the new set?
So I started building Red Fossa as actually the second deck I tried building. So I tried building Green Fossa first. It sucks. But it had I thought it had some potential with the new evasives, but the power level of the meta overall has just gone up way too much. And especially with Red Fossa, initially I went straight to building it with more 6-drops like Humble did here. But what I failed to realize was just how powerful Lumiere is, especially as a defensive tool, but also now as an offensive tool with the Shift Milan line, because you already get the +3 from shifting after the Doc turn or the Gaston turn. But then with Lumiere, which you can play in the curve, it goes +4. Which is nuts. Imagine doing 6 damage to 3 characters on turn 4.
I don't think they all have, like, I don't even know if they have 6 willpower. They probably
have 6 combined, right? So, and just the fact that you can just drop a Mulan for 1 cost and threaten that without investing anything else. You don't even need to have the card in your hand, and your opponent still has to respect it and play around it.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely crazy. Like, these are the kind of decks in set 4 that make me feel like Ruby Amethyst is going to get pushed out of the metagame, because like there's just some combinations that just got so much more powerful, like almost like twice as powerful. And I feel like RA got like almost nothing. So it's just, I don't know how it's gonna sort of stay competitive. On to the next one. You have a Amber Amethyst deck here. You call it Bruno Combo. Dive into it.
Actually, I want to point out that when I built the deck, I called it "Where's Bruno? Here's Bruno."
I played against some of these like Bruno Madrigal. I was actually playing against that right before I hopped on with combination of the Ursula's Cauldron. Pretty powerful card.
Yeah, so I think what's really nuts here, as you point out, is because of cards like Ursula's Cauldron, Bosses in a Roll, and Alma, which does 2 jobs in 1, it searches your entire deck for any Madrigal card you want, usually the Bruno, but if you don't have it in hand, you can search for tech that you need for responses. And so the idea is that once you have both the Bruno and the Isabella on board, they're both questing for 6 every turn, and then you can use the rest of your resources to control the board and essentially protect them. So I think it ends up in a situation where traditionally with Amethyst decks, you had to choose between trading in or going wide. But in this case, you can just do both, right? You can get your 6 lore out every turn and then still use all your rush cards to control your opponent's responses. Plus, both your cards that are gaining lore are evasive, which there's so many strong evasive cards in this set that I think cards like Tinkerbell and Pegasus have become a lot more relevant, just so you can counter them.
Just to clarify, you get 7 lore, right? With the Isabella gaining 4.
Oh, is Isabella
gaining
plus
2?
3? Yeah, sorry. 7 lore every turn. Yeah, so 4 from Isabella and 3 from Bruno.
Do you think that amber is the best complementary color to this Bruno Madrigal like package? Because I've seen it played with some other colors as well. I actually saw Blurple playing it, so blue purple playing the Bruno as well. Like, do you think that amber is going to be the best color combination because of that Alma Madrigal?
I think it might be just because of the armor, because blue, you're losing too much tempo to trying to draw cards to find the pieces, unless you're just relying on the rabbit engine, whereas armor makes the combos so consistent and then still sticks around as a 2-lore quester. The only thing I would question is some of the other amber cards we're running. Like, I think Bare Necessities didn't really feel like it was doing much, and I think we'd probably just want to run more stuff at impacts per board.
Yeah, for sure. All right, I want to hop into some other lists. These ones I took directly from Savjz, friend of the podcast, and one of my favorite people in that deck from. First one I want to talk. What is that?
Oh, it's a immediate display of Brandon's favorite skill, the deck tweaking.
Yeah, exactly. That's the first thing I did. Is I was just like, all right, who are my favorite deck builders? Give me all your lists. All right, the first one here I want to talk about is actually Amethyst Emerald. This does heavily include a lot of the things that Moyne was very high on going into the set review, like the Pegasus package, in combination with Blue Fairy. Moyne, what are your thoughts initially when looking at this list? Also has access to 2 different high-end shift targets in the form of Ursala, which is shifting onto the 2-cost Ursala, which take a song from your opponent, as well as the top-end Elsa at 8 costs. This is one of the lists that I did watch Savjz's video. He was very, very high on. He said this list was working extremely well for him. Also includes Diablo, and we don't talk about Bruno as other new cards, as well as the Bell, the 5-drop 4/4 that quests for 2.
Yeah, I mean, and overall, it just plays a very high quality of cards and still has a good amount of flood bonds for the Blue Fairy. And its aggression comes in a form of a lot of evasives with 4 Pegasus, 4 Blue Fairy, and then also 4 of the Shift Pegasus and Diablos. To me, I don't get why we need to play the uninkable Elsas. With the new quality of cards that we can play. Maybe it's just because you wanted to try a few of the new cards. I don't think we necessarily need the new Elsa or the Shift Elsa. But other than that, the deck looks like a pile of good, aggressive, tempo, evasive cards, which is very strong. And even you don't necessarily have the biggest amount of singers for Bruno, but I think Bruno is just good enough where even if only a few cards can occasionally sing it as an inkable song, it's just good enough.
Mm-hmm. And before we talk about our last list, I want to ask you, Kawa, like, where are you leaning towards, at least to initially go to for testing? Like, what speaks to you from the new decks?
From the new stuff, honestly, like, even I'm not gonna lie, after looking at Savjz's Emerald Amethyst, it's like this looks like something I really, really want to test. I think the power level of the big Ursula is something I really want to test out, but
have you seen the promo, by the way? The new promo? Like the next one. It actually looks so much better than Stitch Rockstar. Like Stitch Rockstar looks good, but holy shit, that next one looks fantastic. Sorry, tangent.
Yeah, no, I think this is the type of list I kind of want to experiment upon. It's where I feel comfortable with a lot of the Amethyst kind of tempo package. I think tempo decks is where I'm going to like really lean lean towards at the moment, and this seems like it does it really well. I actually really want to experiment with that bell as well, because I wasn't too sure how good it would be, but I've seen a few people test with it so far, and it seems to be like pretty decent. But yeah, and then also the whole Pegasus thing that Moyne talked about last week also seems kind of ridiculous. So the whole power level of evasives, it feels like we're kind of going back to, not going back to set one, but when you guys figured out, oh, if we put evasives into Ruby Amethyst, oh, this becomes like really, really good. But now it's like the strength of like so many cards has like just having the keyword evasive is absolutely crazy. Like a card like Diablo having evasive, if you don't have the damage, you just can't kill it. The Pegasus, like it's wild. And particularly the Blue Fairy, I think is really interesting, because that's the type of card that, not even just with Emerald, but there's been a lot of Floodborne cards that were introduced in this set that aren't particularly great for even like shifting. Like, say for example, the Diablo, there's like the Steel Aladdin Floodborne 3 cost. That I think is when you quest, you kill an item. Like, just to have these cheap Floodborne cards is really interesting to try and activate the Floodborne cards like Blue Fairy, and I think it's like Honest John within Ruby and stuff like that. So I'd be curious to see if that's like a direction that maybe decks go, because if that's a problem where, you know, we're talking about card draw and stuff, and Blue Fairy plus these Floodborns is kind of an activator of that, maybe you can kind of get around that in certain decks that traditionally don't draw too many cards. But I suppose if you're playing Blue Fairy, you're playing Amethyst, you should be drawing cards anyways, in my opinion. But yeah, I would say I'm still going to be like pairing Amethyst with other colors personally.
Well, I'll ask you specifically about this list. Do you think that we could potentially cut that 3-cost Elsa, maybe the top end Elsa as well, and add just in some of that traditional Amethyst bounce package in the form of Snake or Madamim, or even something like Goad? Because it does seem like we have, I mean, if we looked at any Amethyst decks, like, I mean, in the past, I guess like 6 months to a year, or at least like since set 2, it felt like it always had that package, because the package is so powerful in Amethyst. Or is that where you would initially be leaning towards? Is like some? I
think that's what I would want to start on. It's interesting to see if like like Madamim Fox and Merlin Goat are fundamentally like, they're such powerful cards that I compare them to, like, I compare it to this 3-cost uninkable Elsa. I'm just like, okay, yeah, I would just love to have a Fox in here. And even 2 Goats, when like the power of these tempo decks is that they can switch on the gas so fast, become so aggressive, and like especially this set and the previous set, it's like, okay, I only need like 1 or 2 Goats and I win the game, because it threatens so much value from like just drawing that card, right? So I feel like not having those cards in this type of deck maybe it doesn't make too much sense. But I also like I understand the experimentation. People want to be trying other stuff out, but I feel like there's like enough top end in this deck already from what I'm seeing with like the big Ursala and even just like the Pegasus and stuff like that, that I don't think you need much more. And that's kind of what's happened in like the Ruby Amethyst decks as well, right? It's like, well, the top end has been cut because you actually don't really need it as the tempo deck, you know?
Yeah.
It's also the power of the Snake. So basically, I think the biggest fallacy is to think, okay, but I want to play Blue Fairy on 2, so Snake's bad. Or also in Steel Amethyst, I want to play like in set 3 Steel Amethyst, I want to play Smear on 2, so Snake's bad. But the power of Snake is even like it is a good play on turn 2, and even if you have a better play on turn 2, it's not bad to have like a little bit more threat density of 2 drops where you will curve out more often, because at the same time, it's really not a terrible card mid or later in the game, especially in conjunction with Merlin Rabbit and Merlin Goat. So I think it could definitely still find its way into this list.
Yeah, for sure. All right, the last list that I want to mention, I sort of quickly mention it, is the Sapphire Steel items deck, because it's ridiculous. I mean, you take what looks like a deck from set 3, as in the Blue Steel deck, but then you add in like again the Steel Popsicles, which is the Forest Fear. You have the Top Hats to reduce the cost of some items, and then you have this Queen and Scuttle, which are just kind of getting items on the top of your deck. It seems really cool, to be honest. Like, Steel is going to insulate you against some of those more aggressive decks that might come out early in the metagame, as well as just like full committal item control is just a cool concept that I don't think we've had in the past, and this kind of flushes that out a bit more. I did notice that, I did hear in Savjz's video when he talked about this in particular, he said that like this is not one he was super high on. He thought it was just a little bit too cute. But I don't know. I'd be interested to see where Blue Steel can land. The issue with a lot of these whole new world decks just is the power of Blue Red. And Blue Red did get tools to to sort of shore up some of its bad matchups. Because blue-red, while in my opinion probably being one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful deck in set 3, it was a metagame call to an extent. Because you could bring it to the wrong metagame and get absolutely shit canned. It's just a possibility.
It feels so tough, because like this queen card, the 3-cost inkable, like seems like it can be kind of good. It's a little bit slow, obviously, because it needs to come down, then you can do its top effect. But just because I know earlier we were talking about like 3-cost Sapphire cards, and a lot of you're not even talking about Sapphire cards. You're talking about 3-cost cards in general when you're doing like the one jump ahead play. And like the queen seems like a really good card, but again, when your whole line is like you want to be trying to doing the one jump ahead, it's like it feels kind of bad, right? Like, what are you guys' thoughts on the queen as a card? Because
if you're going to play a card in blue stealer, I think that's it, right?
Yeah.
I think
the most powerful thing you're going to do is
go ahead.
Yeah, I think queen doesn't make that much sense in this deck because it's off curve and you're not getting a lot of value when you grab an item. Like the idea with queen, right, is that you grab those 3-cost items, but we have a very low density of high-cost items in this deck, so the payoff for a delayed turn and interrupting your curve to get the queen just doesn't make that much sense to me. I think Scuttle's amazing, though, because it really ups the consistency of us being able to find Quill on free.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, yeah. The whole Quill's a super interesting card because, I'm like, it's so fresh in my mind playing blue-red where it's like I just like always want to play OJA over Quill, unless I'm playing against a whole new world deck where Fishbone Quill becomes a very, very good card. So I think like I've just those play patterns are not super fresh in my mind in terms of like, that curve specifically. I'm just like such a one jump ahead believer at this point. It's just like,
I do think Quill in Sapphire Steel out of stage was probably, because I know a lot of Sapphire Steel decks didn't run the one jump ahead for a while, and then Savjz kind of started playing it, and I kind of some people popped into the deck, but for a long time Quill just seemed like the key central card that you always wanted to see in Sapphire Steel, because then obviously you get out your 5 or 6 drop to sing that whole new world. But I guess with OJA you're kind of accomplishing the same thing. The only difference, like the benefit of the Quill obviously is like if your hand is like kind of bricked already, you can kind of resolve that issue with the Quill and get rid of like the cards you really don't want to try and do your whole new world thing. But the one jump ahead, you still need to have those like really inkable cards and stuff like that. So
it's always a card advantage too. Like Fishbone Quill is strict card disadvantage. So like if you're not playing a whole new world deck, that's why Fishbone Quill is like just doesn't feel super good sometimes.
I don't think you should ever play Quill, unless you're red blue without having whole new world. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you should do it already in red blue.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean the crazy strength of Quill is just also when you're chaining whole new worlds and then you're still like inking 2 cards a turn, and then or also even after ramping and not finding whole new world, at least it looks like card disadvantage, but you have an item on the board with 4 Lava Charm in your deck, so often that can somewhat negate the card disadvantage you have at the start of the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. All right, I think Moyen, you're the only person we haven't asked because we asked Kawa. Alphos obviously talked about his decks. I'm a blue-red believer right now. Where are you leaning towards out of all these lists, these archetypes?
I don't know. I mean, I'm looking forward to testing.
He's a new Red Fassa. He's gone from absolutely despising Red Fassa to being the biggest Red Fassa believer. Watch, I'm gonna call it right now.
It looks great. It doesn't look like extremely fun, but I will test everything very like in and out. But I need to prep for the first, so that's on the top of my mind.
Yeah, that's like the interesting.
I do think a lot of good players like Moyen are going to look over Red Fassa because it doesn't have a high amount of complexity. You don't have a lot of options to choose from. So I think if you're really trying to challenge yourself on like a turn-to-turn basis, then you might not be interested in a deck that just wants to curve out for the win.
Yeah, yep. But that's not denying that the deck's not powerful. Like
the
deck looks legit.
If that will give me the best chance of winning, I'll curve out. I don't. It's not like I'm so pride that I will not play curve decks.
Oh, I didn't mean you specifically. I mean, I've heard that sentiment from a lot of players, but they've avoided Red Fassa just because they don't find it.
Oh, I avoided it because it was trash.
Yeah, I avoided Green Steel, I think, because I didn't like the play patterns, but I wouldn't avoid it for like prepping for a tournament. but I might avoid it like on ladder where things are not
Yeah.
as serious. Anyway, that concludes our list for the new set. Again, everything's in the description. Alphos, just want to give you a chance to shout out where people can find you, what you're up to, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to hear more about that Amber Emerald deck, just released a video on it today. Go check that out. I'm on Twitch, YouTube for streaming, YouTube again for videos, and I'm a much worse coach than Moyen, but if you if you want my coaching, I offer that too.
Awesome. Well, again, the T-shirt is for sale right now. It'll be going away forever very soon after this podcast releases. And if you don't have a chance to buy one, you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and we'll take the new reviews and we'll draw a winner for a free T-shirt. So do that. And also just leaving us a review is like the number one thing you can do. So it helps us out a lot. If you enjoy the podcast, definitely do that. Video version of this on YouTube at youtube.com/@PodcanaPodcast. To subscribe while you're there. Almost at 3K. Twitters are Brendan APG, Kawatech_CG, Moyen_HS, and at Alphos NZ, which is a total fraudulent name, by the way, which we covered.
Parentheses, now in the UK, as it was in my Twitter bio for a bit.
Anyway, thank you all so much for listening. We'll see you next week.